Hollywood's vision of the grand medieval castle, forget it. All of it. The handsome knights on horseback, the princess sipping wine in candlelight, the noble family wrapped in furs by a roaring fire. It's a lie. A carefully decorated, sweet-smelling, comfortably heated lie. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine yourself standing in the courtyard of a castle in northern England. January 1347, 5 in the morning. The first thing you notice isn't the cold, it's the smell. Because the large stable in the corner of the courtyard has housed 15 horses overnight, and the manure hasn't been cleared in days, rancid fat and burnt meat seep through the kitchen walls beside you. And when the wind blows from a certain direction, the contents of the castle's toilet system, those stone ledges jutting out from the outer walls, run directly down the exterior. Not frozen. Not yet. The people of the 14th century were so accustomed to this cocktail of smells that you would be the only one standing there covering your nose. Today I'm going to show you what school never taught you, what Game of Thrones conveniently skipped, and what Hollywood has been hiding for decades. The real, uncomfortable, ice-cold face of history. Now let's step inside. And no, inside is not better than outside. When a modern person looks at a castle, they think, solid as a fortress, warm inside. The 14th century reality is the exact opposite. Stone doesn't hold heat, stone destroys it. Those magnificent walls, a meter thick, were perfect for keeping you cool in summer. In winter, they did the opposite. The walls became giant blocks of ice, absorbing and suffocating every trace of warmth inside. When the great fireplace roared, 80% of the heat went straight up the chimney. The remaining 20% scorched the face of whoever sat directly in front of it, while their back turned to ice. If you had lived in that era and served a noble family, your morning duty would have been this: go to your master's bedchamber and turn over the straw mattresses. Why? Because straw absorbs moisture, molds, and becomes a nest for lice. Morning routine: crush the lice, rearrange the bed, begin the day. And to stay warm, animals, literally. On the harshest winter nights, servants and lower-ranking soldiers moved into the stables. The body heat of horses and oxen generated far more warmth than any stone room could. The 14th century solution to freezing to death was simply this: press yourself against a cow. And those stone floors, the ones you admire so pleasantly in museums today, would drain the feeling from your feet within minutes in winter. The solution was to scatter straw across them. But that straw collected everything: dropped food, bone fragments, rat droppings, and occasionally human vomit. The English called this mixture rushes. In wealthier homes, a little lavender might be tossed on top, but underneath, the filth remained exactly what it was. Now, let's look at the real people. Not the lords, not the knights, the people who actually kept this place running. If you had lived in that era, there is a 95% chance you were not nobility. You were someone who worked in that castle, mucking out the stables, hauling firewood, scrubbing pots in the kitchen. And the story of these people is one that films never bother to tell. You wake up at 4:30 in the morning. Why so early? Because lighting the great ovens, preparing the Lord's breakfast, and cleaning the stables all demand time before the household stirs. When you wake, you're wearing the same clothes you wore yesterday and the day before. Washing them? In winter, water is scarce, expensive to obtain, and nearly impossible to heat. The average castle servant wore the same garments for weeks at a time without washing. And then there are the lice. In the 14th century, lice were so ordinary that modern people genuinely cannot comprehend it. In your hair, in your clothes, in your bed. It made no distinction between rich and poor. The only difference was that the wealthy lit pleasantly scented candles and pretended not to notice. What about food? In winter, fresh fruit and vegetables don't exist. From November onward, for months, what you eat is salted meat, hardened bread, oat porridge, and if you're fortunate, an onion. Salt was used so heavily to preserve meat that a modern person eating this diet would be courting hypertension within weeks. And that salted meat was often, quite literally, beginning to rot. Spices were used to mask it. But Silk Road spices were expensive, which meant that for the poor servants of a castle, eating half-rotten meat was simply called dinner. Now for the most unsettling part, the toilet. Castles had stone protrusions called garderobes, the 14th century version of what we call a bathroom. These openings emptied directly onto the outer wall or into the moat below. In winter, the stone seat was so cold that sitting on it could cause what we would today recognize as a contact burn. People began requesting rooms far from the garderobes, but they had no real choice. And the smell? The management strategy, and this is genuinely true, was to store clothing near the garderobes because the ammonia was believed to kill moths. So the solution to the stench was to put your wardrobe next to the open sewage chute. Now imagine falling ill in that castle. The most common cause of death in winter wasn't a cold itself. It was a cold becoming pneumonia. And in the 14th century, the treatment for pneumonia was this: apply warm manure to the chest. Fresh horse dung, wrapped against the skin, because its heat heals. The result was, more often than not, a raging infection on top of the original illness. But it gets worse. If your fever climbed, the medieval physician would recommend bloodletting, because according to the theory inherited from Galen, bad blood caused disease, and that blood needed to come out. They would cut your wrist and let blood drain into a bowl until you passed out. This treatment, applied to a body already weakened by cold and hunger, frequently pushed people past the point of no return. Toothache. There were no dentists. There were blacksmiths. The same man who shoed horses would pull your tooth without anesthetic. 2 men would hold your shoulders down while he worked. And then there is 1347 itself. That year was not chosen by accident. The Black Death. Arriving at the precise midpoint of the 14th century, it would go on to kill half the population of Europe. Castles offered no protection. Rats were everywhere, lice were everywhere, and nobody had the faintest idea how the disease spread. Some physicians recommended inhaling powerful, foul odors, the logic being that bad smells would drive out bad smells, and so the stench of a slaughterhouse was considered a legitimate medical treatment. If you lived through a winter in that era and emerged in spring with your health intact, you did not take it for granted. You understood it as a genuine miracle. So could a modern person survive a winter in a 14th century castle? In theory, perhaps. In practice, almost certainly not. The cold alone wouldn't kill you, but an open wound infection would. You might avoid the worst of the water, but you wouldn't know which sources were safe. Most were contaminated with human and animal waste. You might find enough to eat, but without vitamin C, your teeth would begin loosening before spring arrived. And most critically, you are a product of a sterile world. Your immune system has no defense against the dozens of pathogens that ordinary 14th century children had already built natural resistance to simply by surviving infancy. Medieval people were not strong because they were exceptional. They were strong because they had already survived everything that would have killed you in the first month. You and I would most likely never see the thaw. And if you still think castles are romantic, consider this. Those stone walls are still standing today not because the people inside lived magnificent lives. They're standing because the walls were built thick enough and solid enough to keep the misery contained within them from showing on the outside.